Welcome to the Sober Unicorn. We are a gay hosted, all-inclusive podcast about sobriety and addiction recovery for the LGBT plus community and all of our allies. I am your host Holden, and thank you for joining us today. Hey, everybody, it's Holden back here again with the Sober Unicorn. Sorry for taking last week off. Life has kind of been a little bonkers, but we are back here again this weekend to bring you a new episode. So today we have a reoccurring guest, Miss Chelsea, with us today. Hello, Chelsea.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. So before we get into this topic today of kind of bouncing back and finding success after a relapse, I know that you recently started your own podcast called Recovered Life. And it focuses, it seems to be a little bit more on like the mental health side of addiction and recovery and stuff like that. So why don't you tell everybody kind of a little bit about your own podcast?
I would love to. Yes. Well, it is called Recovered Life Podcast with Chelsea Anderson. It just recently launched. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, Buzzsprout, like across the platforms. And you're right, it does have a mental health and recovery focus. So, for example, I do, as someone who's sober in recovery, I do want to focus partially on that. For example, we'll be doing like an October series during the month of October coming up, where I'll be talking with a lot of my friends and maybe some professionals in the recovery field. Who knows? You'll have to listen and see. But then there's also, like, for example, a big passion of mine is suicide prevention and healthcare for like underserved populations. And because of my own story, like I care deeply about the veteran and service member community. So I've already got some guests like lined up to talk about their experience maybe with PTSD or depression or things like that. And I know I'm going to be focusing a lot as well on the issue of faith and mental health. I have a friend in Texas whose name is Brittany. She is actually a sober woman as well, and she's actually now a pastor's wife. Like that's been one of the gifts of her recovery. She got married to a pastor and is active in ministry. But she and I have like real concerns over how sometimes we can tend to get shamed, especially if we're people of faith and we're struggling with mental health. Like, and we're trying to figure out how to integrate the two of those in a way that can best serve people. So I'm really like glad to have her on as well. So it's going to be like, I know I'm rambling here. I'm just super excited every time I talk about it, but I'm sure you feel the same when you start talking about your work as well. But yeah, like mental health from various perspectives. And I love that it's from various perspectives because I want literally anyone who clicks play on one of my podcast episodes to find something from it and to gain something from it, to gain some hope from it, which is why I am keeping it non-political, because that is something that's dividing too much of us right now, and I don't want to lose anybody, this shit is killing people, whether it's addiction or mental health or whatever, and every life deserves to be saved no matter what. So anyway,
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I hope many of my listeners will tune in. I know I've tuned into your first episode, and it was a really good episode with you and your
thank
friend.
you.
So, I mean, I look forward to many more. Um, so, of course, if anybody wants to listen of more of Chelsea's story of like getting into sobriety, you can tune into episode 24 here on the Sober Unicorn podcast, or you could hop over to her podcast and you'll hear, of course, tidbits of her story as well on there. But so, of course, this you've been sober before. Okay, you were sober for 3 years and you suffered a relapse. And of course, if anybody has been listening to the Silver Unicorn, we all know that I recently also got suffered a relapse. I'm coming up on 30 days sober again.
Whoop, whoop.
Um, thank you. And I was sober for 9 months. And I know that for many people, a relapse can 100% take you out of the program or take you out of sobriety in general. So, what I would say, of course, you were already 3 years sober at this point. So, what led up to relapsing?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. I was sober. My original sobriety date was December 31st of 2011, I believe. I was a New Year's sober baby, but I had 3 years, and then, well, let me just say this: like in our those familiar with any 12-step program really are familiar with what we call the Big Book, which is um, was written and published in 1939. Um, that basically shows the roadmap or the steps to take to recover from alcoholism, right? And in there, it talks about how constant fear and tension will lead to more drinking or using. And it talks about in the chapter into action, it talks about how, time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Well, those people that wrote that book way back in the 1930s are not lying, because it happened to me. So, for those that don't know or who haven't heard our previous conversation, I am a member of the LGBTQ community. I wouldn't identify as strictly gay. I'm kind of in that like bisexual space, I guess, which, to me means I have capacity for attraction to both men and women. I'm okay with that now. Um, but back then I was not, and I lived in a lot of fear over what my family and friends would think of me, what my sponsor would think of me, what God would think of me. And for someone like me, that's not something that I can keep within myself and deal with on my own very long before my brain takes me back to, I wonder what, I know what'll make me feel better. Yeah, that thing that I loved until it turned on me and it damn near killed me, right? And for me, that was alcohol and pain pills. So, um, like the book also talks about how suddenly the thought crosses our mind, and then we are off to the races again with the using and drinking, right? Well, I came home from work one day. It was just kind of a normal day, normal day. I hadn't like planned to drink. Like that morning, I swear to you, when I woke up, I had no desire to drink, no intention of drinking. You know what I mean? Um, but something like pissed me off. Someone got on my nerves. I got resentful over something in my brain because I wasn't doing the sufficient work, you know, of recovery. Like I had kept this thing to myself, you know, hadn't told my sponsor about it out of fear. Like, and they say like resentment is the number one offender. For me, it's fear every time. And so because I wasn't really staying current with that spiritual work, I was letting yesterday's problems, like, instead of dealing with them, I was carrying them into today, right? I wasn't taking a daily inventory and making amends where I did harm, taking my fears and resentments to God and asking for help, and because I wasn't living a fully honest life, I had no effective mental defense against the first drink again.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about in the program rigorous honesty,
Yeah.
and that we tend to relapse before we ever relapse. Um, and I think when we say that we relapse before we relapse, I think we relapse in a spirituality, that we
Oh,
revert
yeah.
back to our old ways. Because I know in my first like 6 months of sobriety, I was like super nice to people that pissed me off. I was not road raging to anybody, and now like a month and a half roughly prior to my relapse, like, and even now today, I mean, I'm still struggling, but everybody in every situation seems to just piss me off to no end. And now my craving to drink is probably worse than it's ever been. In my first journey of sobriety, my first 9 months, like I didn't really want to drink. When I relapsed, if anybody hasn't listened to the episode, it was on narcotics, so it was not off of drinking. I have not drank in over 10 months, but it's it's unfortunate. I mean, the thing is like if we stop doing the work, and it's the work of, I'm not saying that you have to do every single thing of every single 12 steps on a daily basis, but it's just make sure you are staying in connection with your higher power if you're working a program. If you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, make sure you do what is required of that. Um, and just reaching out to other alcoholics. I noticed that a few weeks prior to it happening, I stopped reaching out to friends. I stopped checking in on other people in my program and in my rooms. I stopped going to meetings as frequently. I allowed, I put everything um, before my own sobriety. Like I put school,
Hmm.
work, business, life, friends, sex, especially sex. And that's, if you listen to the previous episode, that's ultimately what led me down that path. Um,
It's always tends to be sex and checks that gets us in trouble. The
yes,
money in relationships.
because right now I'm chasing the money, like to
Yeah.
no end. And my sponsor even brought it to my attention like 2 days ago. He's like, "You're really angry since you started this new job." And it's the
Hmm.
truth because any conversation we had, I'm like, this bitch and that bitch and this cunt. Um, but that's a, I could go down that rabbit hole. But the reason that I wanted to bring you on specifically is even though you relapsed, you now have 7 years sobriety. So
Glory be to God. Yes.
yes, so of course you relapse, and you of course you're hit, your pride is hit, your ego. How did you overcome that hit to your pride to step foot back into a room and to start this journey over again?
Well, I every time I'm asked that question, I always say that I always thank God that I have a sponsor who did not allow me to sit on my ass and waste any of my time or his. And I actually met my sponsor on a private recovery Facebook group during the initial time that I was sober, right? And during that initial time that I was sober, I had learned so much about the big book and learned so much about like AA recovery history and the importance of like preserving that for our future generations of alcoholics and addicts that will need it, right? And I was just so like excited about what I was learning, and I was sharing that with my sponsor in this private Facebook group and telling, talking about all the people that I've met that have taught me this. And my sponsor like chimes in and says, "Holy crap, I know these people. What a small world." Now, granted, I'm in Indiana, he's from Texas, right? So it's like God was like introducing me to all these people, and my sponsor happened to be connected with them. And I realized, like, in the interim, like, through meeting my sponsor, I would go on like Facebook and I would see all these pictures of him and his boyfriend, who I also adore. Um, they're just two great men that love God and love each other and love people, right? And they, like, I would just see them look so happy and so like full of purpose in their life. They were succeeding in every way, it seemed like, right? And I said, I don't know how God can hate them. Like, I had, on one hand, I had the belief system that I was taught, not by everyone in my life, but that's kind of the perception I had, for whatever reason, which I won't go into. And then there was um, the like evidence from people like them that, hey, maybe there's another way to think about this, and maybe God loves them, and God could maybe love me. So after I relapsed, and I figured out like I relapsed around dishonesty, I reached out to my sponsor and said, "Well, I relapsed again. Can you imagine that?" And I told him like I need help. Like I know you're like solid in the step work and everything, and I need you to help me with that. And I need help learning to live as me, as myself. And so like immediately, like this is some dedication here. Like I live in Indiana. My sponsor um had a work related business engagement to go to in like Chicago or something. So he, had a rental vehicle that he took to Chicago from Texas and then drove 2 or 3 hours out of his way to meet with me to do a fifth step. And here in like rural Indiana where I'm at, I still remember the park bench that we sat on where he made me say the words I'm bisexual out loud. And you know how like when your sponsor like makes you do something like that they've done before that they hated, and then they know that you're going to hate it too, but they're going to make you do it anyway, and you do the thing, and then you just want to smack the smirk off the face. It was one of those. But and then like after my sponsor left, well, before he left, like we finished the fifth step, and then he like reiterated to me again what I already knew, and that is like he pointed to all the houses like surrounding the park where we were at. He says, "In your local community here are people that are dying just like you were. And as soon as we're done with these steps, as soon as you found that spiritual experience again, your responsibility is going to be to pass that on to others. It's not an option, it's like a responsibility, you know?" And so my sponsor left to drive home, and for those familiar with our program, like they'll know like after our fifth step, we had our fifth step, we do step 6 and 7 immediately after, which involve like an hour of meditation and reflection on what we've just done, right? And I remember sitting in my car, I could still point you to right where I was sitting, and reflecting upon what had just happened, saying, God, I was honest for the first time. Fine. I just don't want to die, but I will never be okay with this, that being my sexuality, and I will not talk about it ever again. And like, I didn't hear like a response audibly, but what I heard like internally, like in my spirit, was, yes, you will. And yes, you will be able to talk about it one day. And that's all God said, you know? And what I love is like, it wasn't like oh, yes, you will, like threatening. It was like, yes, you will. Like, there's, you know what I mean? It was like,
Like
it's
a
hard to
reassurance.
describe. Yeah. And so that was kind of my journey. And then, of course, I was able soon after to start making amends to, in all the ways, like relationally, financially, in all the ways that are described in our book, right? And I started taking big book meetings and taking this message to our local correction center. I started just reaching out, right? And things have been really different ever since.
I mean, well, it's been 7 years, so I mean, there must have
Yeah.
been a huge difference. I think him making you say that out loud. I mean, even though deep down we know what we like and what we enjoy out of the same sex or opposite sex, it's like the saying out loud makes it feel much different. Like,
Yeah. And for those of us like who are not sure if we're okay with that part of ourselves or not, like it feels good in a way, but then not in another way, which, that's kind of where we get to continue seeking God. And the advice I always give to people who are kind of struggling with that, because I've had the opportunity to work with other women in recovery who have had almost literally the exact same story and have got the same results that I've got. And what I encourage them to do is like try to shut out all other opinions related to this issue, like anything you've heard in the past, positively or negatively or indifferent, about you and your sexuality, right? Shut out all other voices. Spend extra time in meditation and prayer about it, and that's where you will get your answer.
it seems like dishonesty. I mean, we talk about other people, other women having a similar experience. I'll bring up Kim. She was on the show. She was the same way. She went into the
Hmm.
program and could not be honest with her sponsor about that she at one point dated a woman in her life and liked it, and possibly she doesn't really know if she's bisexual, but she's like not ruling it out. um
Yeah.
but it was the fact that she could not be honest about this thing that happened when she was like 17, that kept causing her to chronically relapse. And then the moment she finally was like let it out, she got closer to her God of her understanding, and she is now continuously, I think she's post like 7 or 8 months sobriety, when she beforehand was like 3 months relapse, 4 months relapse. um
Hmm.
and so it completely altered her program. And I think even if you're not struggling with sexuality, I think the huge takeaway from this is honesty. The thing is, you have to be 100% transparent. I mean, if you are working a program, you need to make sure that when it comes to step five, when you're doing your step four, going into step five, like don't hold back, because all those things that we are so like secretive about, like your sponsor's gonna look at you but like, and what, bitch? Like it's
Yeah,
like
like
nothing to
that all you
them.
got?
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's what happened with mine. There was one thing that I held back, and like I think I called him the next day and was like, "There's something that I need." I lied, didn't essentially lie, but I mean I didn't disclose.
It's
And
more like a lie by omission, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so he's like, "Well, what is it?" And I told him, and he's like, "Okay, do you know you were wrong?" Yes. Have you, like, essentially, I can't make amends to this individual, but he's like, have you essentially made, like, let God know that if you could make these amends that you would? I'm like, yes. And he's like, okay, then like let's move on. Like it was, there was like no nothing. It was like a blink of an eye, and he was like, dude, like again, that's all you got. And it's so important to see that just a small fraction of something. Yes, sexuality is a huge thing, but you finally decided to admit that you were bisexual. Saying that I am bisexual, three words, was, it seems like, the breaking point of you being 100% honest with yourself, with God, and with those around you, the person that you need to discuss this with, and moving forward into your program. It's like you admitting you were bisexual is like the worst thing imaginable at the time,
Mhm.
but now 7 years later, you're like, come on, bitch, like why didn't I do this shit sooner?
Yeah. I think what's also been cool is like as of late anyway, realizing that that is one part of my identity, but it's not me, the whole person. Like for example, that's why I didn't choose to focus my podcast or my like advocacy work only on the LGBT part of me and the community. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's because like I know you and I kind of discussed this earlier, but one and I've discussed this with my therapist a lot actually lately. But what irks me more than almost anything else these days is lack of empathy among people who don't see eye to eye all the time, and cancel culture. Can we please talk about cancel culture for a minute? Because I even think it's affecting those of us in the rooms of recovery, and that like I understand the need for healthy boundaries. I understand the need of like where it causes us someone to not be able to be authentic. Like for example, maybe I'm not the person to be your mentor or your sponsor or whatever, but it is still my responsibility to the best that I can like carry this message to you as it was freely given to me, regardless. Like, yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I feel we jump too quickly onto cancel culture. Just again, as you just said, just because there's a small disagreement, and I think it I wouldn't say the term cancel culture, I wouldn't say comes into the rooms, but the fact of somebody having
The
a disagreement,
behavior,
yeah, I
yeah.
was going to say, yeah, somebody having that disagreement and then being like just shunned from the
Yeah.
group, because of an accidental comment or a misunderstanding, or, and it's like there's so many things that people have to understand, is that when we walk into a recovery area, whether it's a recovery, an AA, NA, CMA, or going to an event like I went to Big D Roundup in Dallas, which is a gay sober event, like there are so many different personalities. There's
Mhm.
Christians, Jews, Muslims, there is Republican, Democrat, and in between, and then there's non-political and there's atheists. And I know a friend of mine, he's atheist, and he's sorry, Satanist, and people in the recovery rooms just seem to like completely shun him and not even want to talk
Mm.
spirituality with him, when in all reality, like he's actually a very spiritual person. Like just because
Mm.
his spirituality is not your spirituality doesn't mean his is wrong and yours is more right. And so people tend to essentially cancel, if we want to use the term cancel culture, they, it's like they completely dismiss him and just try to cancel him out because he has a different perception on things than others.
Yeah. A perfect example I give of this is my grand sponsor Vince, who passed away. It's just been a little over a year. And so I've been like super reflective on this concept lately because of the way he demonstrated this in my life. So let's all take a lesson from Vince real quick, shall we? But so he like Vince was very like he's from Texas, right? He's when he passed, he had just turned 60, so he was kind of like the on the younger end of our grandparents' generation, right? He was conservative in his value system. He was a man who loved God very much. He was a Christian, and that, of course, affected his worldview on things. And so he and I didn't see eye to eye on everything, but we saw eye to eye on a lot. And because of that, like after I came out, and I told you guys I came out like at the same time I got sober, and he became my grand sponsor, right? And I never heard that man talk negatively to me or about me. I never heard him, like, he never treated me different. We had like talks in which I told him about my frustrations with some people in the church, and he didn't like judge me for that. Like, I think what's great about the rooms of recovery is the vast majority of us realize that because of like the struggles we've had or our past mistakes or anything like that, like we are not in a position to look down on others, like no matter how much we don't agree with them. And he just modeled that so well for me. So now, like, that's just what I try to pass on to others, and I will always be grateful for that example. And that's why in 99.999% of cases, I'm not going to cut off relational connection with people, even when others might, over politics or religion or anything like that.
Or the fact that a member of NA is in a room of AA, because
Right. I
there's
mean,
there's that. I mean,
yeah.
I've only found that in like super old school rooms where somebody introduced himself as an addict. At the end of the day, whether it's alcohol or methamphetamine or heroin, like you're still an addict. You're just an addict of a different substance. So,
Yeah. And
I
like
mean,
there's people that think kind of in that vein, and then there's people like I will gladly say like I'm a big book thumper nerd. Okay? So like I have like convictions on certain things that probably you are different, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, like I can respect a person who comes right out and says what they believe about certain things like you just did. Then I respect a person who's wishy-washy, whose beliefs
mhm.
change depending on who's in the room. No, I respect someone who will say exactly what they think. You know what I mean? Even though I don't agree, rather than someone who will lie just to please me.
Yeah, I mean, you being a big book thumper, the book states the alcoholic who suffers, not the straight alcoholic, not the gay alcoholic. And I think that's so important. Like as you said earlier with your podcast, you don't focus on the gay culture. I with my podcasts are a little different. I feel representation of addicts and LGBT. There's not enough, but I also don't exclude absolutely anybody from the podcast. I've had straight people on, I've had gay people on, trans. So I want anybody to come on and feel 100% comfortable. I try to keep it about 60% LGBT representation. But again, it's who I've had heroin, opioid addicts, I've had alcoholics, of course, I've had meth addicts. Like at the end of the day, everybody has a story to share. Um,
Yeah.
so back to the bouncing back, the topic of the episode. Um, of course, you're 7 years. I'm only coming up on 30 days.
Can I say something
Yeah,
like
what's
that
up?
that Vince told me? Like there was one time where I stated, "Well, I can't do such and such because I only have 3 years." And he asked me like in all sincerity, please never again use the word only before stating your amount of sobriety.
I'm trying to get better with that because
Thank you.
it's it's been
And
told to
I
me
say
several.
that just because, like, it is kind of ha ha funny, but yet it's really not, because there's somebody out there who cannot put together 2 days.
Yeah, I mean that actually was told to me a few days ago. They're like, dude, this was back when I was like 6 days after the relapse, and they're like, there's people out there that can't put together 24 hours, and here you are with 7 days. They go,
Yeah.
don't be
Yeah.
wrong. Do some people need the celebration and collection of chips, the 30 days, 60, 90, and the yearlies? Yes. Is it important to collect milestone chips for some people? It is very important, but it's also at the end of the day, whether you're 30 days sober or two fucking 20 years sober, you're both sober. Not
Yeah.
one, no, 20 years is not greater than that person that's 30 days. They are not better than, they are not less than. They are both two sober individuals, no matter what their time is. And I think, I mean, just coming from a relapse, I'm still struggling a little bit, but it's the fact that there is so much emphasis and focus on time sober.
Every
With
day's worth celebrating.
every day, yes, is 100% worth celebrating.
It lets that person who can't put together 24 hours know, like, hey, this is possible. And honestly, like, someone like that in that situation is going to maybe potentially relate more to someone who says, I got 30 days today, thank God. You know what I mean? Than they will someone who says, I got 7 years today. Because to them, 7 years feels like an eternity.
It is. I mean, I know when I first stepped into the rooms that when I hear people that had 20, 30 plus years, I would look at them and be like, I can't even imagine that. I understand we
Yeah.
take,
That's
I,
my dad. Like, he stood up a couple months ago and got 27. And I'm
wow.
like, thanks to the example that he set for me, I know I can make it that. Like, I've seen it done by too many people to know that it's not to know, that yes, it is possible. But yeah, I'm also very aware that, he did that a day at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I see if I have a photo, but I worked at, of course, at a funeral home recently. I've talked about this one other time in an episode, but of course, the man died. Of course, we're at a funeral home. The wife brought in his AA chips to be buried with
Mm,
him, and it was,
wow.
I think, 34 years worth of chips. He was missing, I think, like 1 or 2 years in that mix, but like the max number was like 34 years, and I was like, it's insane that his wife, even though she wasn't a part of like the journey, because that was of course his journey, she knew how much that meant to him, and
Mm-hmm.
he wouldn't have had 34 years if he probably kept drinking or kept using. So she wanted to make sure that his hard ass work, even though they're little pieces of aluminum or metal, but those show off a huge amount of dedication to sobriety, a program or non-program, just to the sobriety journey in general. um so I mean, again, like we just kind of went over, whether you're 24 hours sober or whether you're 20 years sober, like be proud of the days that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Because as of you saw 3 years in, as saw 9 months in, it could be gone in an instant. I mean, it's not completely gone. It's I'm not saying the time is lost, but it's the journey starts over. The journey can start over at any given time.
Yeah, and another thing I'd like to say around that is, yeah, the only thing that changed is a date on the calendar. And another thing that hopefully changes a person's level of awareness that, hey, apart from like some kind of help outside of myself, I'm screwed here. I'm gonna die. Like, I hope, like, the only thing that's changed is the day on the calendar, and hopefully that realization right there. But like, you have not lost, and I say this to anybody out there, you have not lost your experiences that you've had in your length of sobriety, helping others, potentially even sponsoring others. You haven't lost those experiences with God. If As long as you continue to, like, put one foot in front of the other, address where you've kind of fallen short in the past, you will be able to look back on that and do just exactly what I'm doing right now. Use it as teaching opportunities for others, where you will be able to look back and say, hey, you guys, this is essentially what not to do. You know what I mean? And here's how you can pick back up, pick back up
Yeah.
where you left off and carry on. And, you know,
I mean, it was a huge lesson for me. I think, I mean, from at least from this experience for myself, it was when going into a sexual exploitation situation to make sure you know who you're going into it with, and make sure that you have full trust in that person, because those people around you that are still in active addiction are not going to give two shits about your sobriety. So now I'm not going to say everybody, but like at least that individual, because if that person cared about the journey that I was on, they would not have brought it into the situation. So I mean, it's just make sure you.
selfishness and self-centeredness is at the root of this disease. So we can't expect people in active addiction to act like sober people.
Oh, 100 million%. So, of course, before we leave here today, where can I know you recently launched your website. So, where can everybody find your website and your podcast?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So my website, which will include a blog, a whole resource list where you can find a whole ton of mental health resources. And I'll be offering tarot readings there in the near future, and you can find more information about me. That is therecoveredlife.com, therecoveredlife.com. And my social media is primarily on Instagram. I just launched my Instagram for Recovered Life, and that is simply at Recovered Life on Instagram. And feel free to reach out to me in the comments and the DMs. Like I love having conversations, getting to know our sober community here. And if you're someone that just wants to say hi or has questions about anything specifically that we've discussed or needs help somehow, I will do my very best. So feel free to reach out to me directly at Recovered Life on Instagram. And you can
Awesome.
find my podcast, Recovered Life, on, like I said earlier, on all the major platforms. So thank
Yes,
you very
and
much for allowing me to do that.
of course, and I will drop a link to the website in the bio of this episode on, of course, all the platforms that we are on as well. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for joining us again today.
You're very, very welcome, Holden, and thank you. Congratulations on continuing to do this work. I know you're seeing more and more success, like not just with like your listener numbers, but just you're creating a lot of excitement around sobriety, like in general, and it's a lot of fun. I hope, like, on one of my trips to Texas this coming spring when I have vacation time, we need to hang out. Like, we need to go to a conference or something. Like, I love recovery conferences, and I know, like, we will have a blast. So I will see you then.
Yes, let me know. All right, have a good one, okay?
You too.
Bye. Thank you again for listening to today's episode. Hit that follow button to be notified about new episodes every week. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram at The Sober Unicorn Podcast or on our website at thesoberunicornpodcast.com. There you will find our episodes as well as our very own sober-owned shop featuring products from small businesses that are sober-owned. And remember everyone, don't be normal, be a unicorn, but better yet, be a sober unicorn.